They buried her father, and almost buried the truth with him. For 3 years, her uncle wore her inheritance like a crown he never earned. But an old man's forgotten trunk was about to change everything. Before we continue, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss how her story ends. In the hill country of southwestern Nigeria, where morning mist settled over terraced cocoa farms like a soft gray shawl, there lay the village of Ayagunle. Before the sun had fully climbed the ridge, a farmer named Adewale would already be walking the rows of his trees, and beside him, small hand tucked into his large one, walked his daughter, Folasade. He taught her to read the color of a ripening pod, the way other fathers taught their children to read books. The deep orange-red that meant sweetness was near, the dull green that meant patience was still required. At the edge of the farm stood a smooth gray boundary stone, older than anyone could remember, worn soft by generations of resting palms. Baba Adewale would rest his hand on it and tell her, "This land remembers who loves it, Fola. Never forget that." Years passed gently in their small mud brick compound, its door carved with old family symbols, evenings filled with pounded yam and laughter around a low fire. One evening, Baba Adewale led Fola to an old wooden trunk in the corner of his room, its wood dark with age. "Whatever happens to me," he said quietly, "know that Elder Babatunde keeps a copy of what matters most." She did not yet understand why her father spoke this way, only that his voice had grown suddenly serious. Not long after, his older brother Anualuwapo began visiting more often, smiling warmly at the table, admiring the yams, praising the harvest. Yet his eyes always drifted past the doorway to the green rows beyond, quietly counting what was not yet his. Then came the illness. It crept in slowly at first, stealing strength from Baba Adewale's broad shoulders, until he could no longer walk the farm he loved, until even sitting upright by the window tired him. Fola nursed him through fevered nights, cooling his brow with a damp cloth, spooning bitter leaf broth between his lips when he could barely swallow. On the last night, he gripped her hand with what strength remained and whispered something urgent, something important. Though in the shadow of the doorway, unseen by either of them, his brother Anualuwapo stood listening. The village gathered for the burial, in white cloth and mournful song, drums beating low and slow beneath the sun. Anualuwapo wept loudly and held Fola close before the crowd, the very picture of a grieving, devoted uncle. But at the edge of the mourners stood old Elder Babatunde, clutching a worn leather satchel to his chest, watching Anualuwapo's performance with quiet, unspoken doubt in his tired eyes. Days later, alone at her father's boundary stone, in the pale light of dawn, Fola pressed her palm to the cool gray rock, exactly as he used to, grief heavy in her chest, but her spirit unbroken beneath it. That same night, in his own house, Anualuwapo sat hunched over his brother's farm papers by lamplight, turning them page by page, a slow and hungry smile spreading across his face. It began quietly, the way most betrayals do. At the village registry office, Anualuwapo pressed a fold of Naira notes into a clerk's palm, glancing once toward the door, and watched as new papers were drawn up, bearing his own name where his brother's had once been. By lamplight that night, his hand pressed a stamp onto a document, carrying a signature that was not truly his brother's. Close enough, he told himself. Close enough for anyone who did not look too carefully. His wife, Iyakemi, saw more than he realized. She stood in the doorway one gray afternoon, arms folded tight across her chest, watching her husband's dealings with a nod of unease she could not yet put into words. Soon a stranger arrived in the village in a dust-gray car, a businessman in a crisp white safari suit, a rolled sitemap tucked beneath his arm, sunglasses pushed up on his head. Anualuwapo welcomed him like an old friend, and walked him across the very rows Fola's father had once walked with her, gesturing wide at the trees as though he himself had planted every last one. Fola returned from the market one afternoon to find strangers driving survey stakes into her father's soil, ribbons fluttering where cocoa pods once hung heavy. Her basket slipped from her hands and struck the ground. When she confronted her uncle in the courtyard, voice shaking, he simply waved a folded document at her, dismissive, unmoved by her tears. Before a gathering of neighbors drawn by the commotion, he declared loudly, so all could hear, that there was no will, that as the elder brother, the land was rightfully his. Desperate, Fola went to Elder Babatunde, begging him to help her make sense of it all. The old man's hands trembled over his own satchel of papers, fear and uncertainty holding him back from speaking, the suspicion already forming behind his eyes. In the market, two women, one plump in a bright yellow wrapper balancing a tray of peppers on her head, the other thin and quick with a woven fan, whispered behind cupped hands and pointed as Fola passed by with her empty basket, cheeks burning with shame that was not hers to carry. Within days, Anuoluapo sat across a table from the businessman, signing away the family's land for a cloth-wrapped bundle of cash, sealing the deal with a firm and satisfied handshake. That night, Fola sat alone on the doorstep of a home no longer hers, a single lantern flickering weakly beside her, the weight of loss pressing down harder than any hunger she had ever known. Quietly, under cover of darkness, Iya Kemi crept to her with a small parcel of food, glancing nervously over her shoulder before hurrying away without a word. By morning, ribbons and wooden stakes marked the cocoa farm like a wound cut fresh across the misty soil. With nowhere left to call home, Fola gathered her few belongings into a single bundle and balanced it on her head, walking away from the compound as her uncle watched, cold and unmoved, from the doorway he now called his own. She found a narrow rented room in the lower village, a thin sleeping mat, a single lamp, walls that let in the night air, and every sound of the street below. To earn her bread, she took up work as a laundress by the river, her hands growing raw and cracked in the cold water, while other women glanced at her with a mixture of pity and quiet, unkind scorn. Anuoluapo, meanwhile, prospered. New zinc roofing sheets were carried into his compound, as he added room after room to his house with the sale money, each addition a little louder than the last. On the farmland itself, the businessman's workers moved in with cutlasses, felling the old trees Fola's father had tended for decades, one by one, their trunks falling with a sound like distant thunder. Deep among the roots, one worker's blade struck something unexpected, a small weathered shrine stone, half-buried, clearly ancestral, clearly old. The men hesitated, murmuring uneasily among themselves, until Anuoluapo arrived, and without a second thought, kicked the stone aside as though it were nothing more than a rock in his way. Word of the desecration reached Fola at the riverside from a passing farmer, and something inside her cracked a little further. That evening, she walked to her father's grave at the edge of the village, and laid a single cocoa pod upon the mound, the sky fading gold to gray above her. She remembered, as if in a half-dream, that very same spot years before, when she and her father had planted a young tree together there, her small hands pressed into soft earth beside his. In her own home, Iya Kemi lay sleepless night after night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of her silence pressing heavier on her chest than any physical burden could. Old Elder Babatunde, too, could not rest easily. Alone by candlelight, he opened his wooden trunk, his fingers hovering just above a sealed envelope tucked beneath old cloth. But fear won out once more, and he closed the lid softly, without looking further. Slowly, something in the village began to shift. The same two market women who had once whispered cruelly now spoke quietly in Fola's defense whenever others gossiped, their loyalty turning like a tide no one had announced. A small child from a neighboring compound brought Fola a gift of roasted corn, wrapped in a leaf. A simple kindness that meant more to her than the boy could ever know. Still, there were nights by the river when exhaustion nearly swallowed her hope entirely, the dark water reflecting a sky as empty as she felt inside. Across the village, Anuoluapo threw a lavish party beneath strings of lantern light, music and laughter spilling from his enlarged house as guests admired his sudden, gleaming fortune. From beyond the compound wall, hidden in the rain that had just begun to fall, Fola watched the celebration in silence, the distance between their two lives now impossible to ignore. On the cleared farmland, construction crews poured the first foundations of a new building, cement mixers churning where cocoa trees once stood tall. Then Elder Babatunde fell gravely ill, too weak even to rise from his sleeping mat. When Fola heard, she came to sit beside him, despite her own hardships, bringing a cup of bitter herbal tea brewed with the little she had left. Moved beyond words, the old man gripped her hand tightly and murmured something urgent through his fever. Broken fragments she could not quite piece together. But that stayed with her long after she left his side. That night, a storm broke over Ayagunle, wind tearing at rooftops, rain hammering the earth in heavy sheets. In his own compound, Anualuapo sat counting a fresh stack of naira by candlelight, and for the briefest moment, something like unease flickered across his face, though he could not have said why. Through Elder Babatunde's window, rain streaked the glass behind the old wooden trunk, sitting quietly in the corner of the room, waiting, as it had waited for years. When morning broke after the storm, Elder Babatunde's young attendant moved to clean the room, and without meaning to, knocked the old trunk open. Papers spilled across the floor in a soft cascade, and among them, a sealed envelope, aged and yellowed at the edges, marked with Baba Adewale's name and the pressed print of his thumb. Weak, but suddenly alert, Elder Babatunde recognized it at once and gasped, calling out with what little strength he had for someone to fetch Fola immediately. She came quickly, breathless, kneeling beside his mat as his trembling hands placed the envelope carefully into hers. In halting breaths, he told her everything, how years before his passing, her father had entrusted him with this sealed will for safekeeping, waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal it. By lamplight, Fola broke the seal and unfolded the brittle paper with careful fingers, her eyes widening line by line as she read her father's familiar, careful handwriting, naming her, clearly and unmistakably, sole heir to the land, sealed with his thumbprint, and a protective clause meant to guard it forever against exactly this kind of theft. There was no time to waste. Fola and the young attendant hurried through the village at first light, the morning mist still clinging low to the rooftops, making their way to the compound of Chief Adigun, where the great man sat beneath the shade tree on his carved stool, morning court already gathering around him. Before the growing crowd, Fola presented the will with steady hands, while Elder Babatunde, too weak to walk, was carried in on his mat to bear witness to the truth at last. Anualuapo arrived, full of his usual confidence, laughing off the claim before the assembled village, waving a dismissive hand as though the whole matter were far beneath him. But Elder Babatunde spoke from his mat, his voice thin yet unwavering, recounting the exact day Baba Adewale had sealed the envelope and placed it into his keeping, years before any of this began. Chief Adigun examined the document closely, comparing its worn seal against an old record book held open by an attendant at his side, his expression giving nothing away. Then, the businessman stepped forward, visibly uneasy, and admitted before everyone that Anualuapo had never once shown him any prior will, only his own confident, unquestioned word. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, turning slowly, steadily, from doubt into open accusation. Anualuapo's composure finally cracked. He stepped back as the weight of the village's gaze pressed in on him from every side, while beside him, Iyakemi lowered her head, unable to meet anyone's eyes any longer. At last, Chief Adigun rose to his feet, lifting the will high above the hushed crowd, and pronounced his judgment for all of Ayagunle to hear. The land, he declared, belonged to Folashade, daughter of Adewale, exactly as her father had always intended it to be. The elders witnessed the ruling with solemn nods, and the chief himself offered Fola a formal blessing and handshake before the entire gathered village. Anualuapo was ordered to repay every naira taken from the sale, his humiliation plain and public, as an attendant recorded the judgment carefully into the village books. The businessman, for his part, agreed at once to relinquish any claim to the land, and by that same afternoon, his workers were already pulling up the stakes and foundation markers they had driven into the soil weeks before. Afterward, Iyakemi approached Fola quietly, tears standing in her eyes, apologizing for her long silence, and offering to return what small comforts she still could. Fola, in a moment of quiet grace, embraced her without bitterness, forgiveness passing gently between them as the crowd slowly dispersed around the two women. In the days that followed, The whole village came together to help clear the damaged shrine site and replant the cocoa saplings that had been lost. Fola herself knelt in the soil once more, hands deep in the warm earth, directing the restoration with the same quiet care her father had once shown her as a girl. Not far off, a humbled Anualawapo could be seen alone, carefully repairing the small shrine stone he had once kicked aside without a thought. A quiet, unspoken penance no one had asked of him. Elder Babatunde, slowly recovering his strength, came to lean on his staff at the edge of the farm, watching the young trees rise again, with a warm, contented smile spreading across his weathered face. That evening, the village square filled with music and food as the whole community celebrated the farm's return, laughter and drumbeats rising together into the night sky. At sunset, Fola returned to the old boundary stone where her story had begun, resting her palm against the cool gray surface exactly as her father once had. Only now, at last, the land was truly and rightfully hers. She visited his grave once more in the fading light, laying fresh cocoa pods and wildflowers upon it, finding a peace that had been so long out of her reach. In the golden light of a new morning, the restored cocoa farm stretched lush and green across the hillside, and Fola walked its quiet rows alone, content, unhurried, at home. Back in her house, the old wooden trunk that had once held her father's final promise now rested closed upon a shelf, sunlight falling softly across its dark wood. A single cocoa pod placed gently on top. A quiet, lasting reminder that even buried truths find their way home. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. It means more than you know, and I hope Fola's patience and Baba Adewale's love stayed with you the way they stayed with me while telling it. If it moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always finds its way home.